Live everywhere.
Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, March 18th, 2020. We are well into our coronavirus isolation period now, and, well, the news is not great. I mean, so far so good, we're all alive, and some of you probably even have some food and supplies left, and probably lots left. But it turns out that the latest word is that we might be looking at a longer-term crisis than we originally thought. And I'm sure Greg will have plenty to discuss on that front. But yes, the news for those watching very closely is that this could be an ongoing situation for quite some time. And it's time to prepare for that. So we'll do our best to try and figure out what it means and how long this is supposed to go. We always knew it was going to, well, I wouldn't say always, but we did know that this was going to take a little while longer than, for instance, the 2 weeks that people said, well, you'll be in isolation for 2 weeks because we have to see whether the virus, the disease has incubated in you and will produce the disease associated with the virus. Sort of 2 weeks is kind of what people had in mind. Schools closed with the idea in mind that they would open again in 2 weeks. But as it turns out, it looks like we're going to be looking at closures much longer. Our schools already have been extended in their closures well into April at this point. But it's beginning to look like we might have this disease sort of hanging around for a while. And I had been wondering about this for a little bit. And I guess some of the latest science has begun to address this. Just sort of wondering whether, well, they did keep comparing the coronavirus to the flu, although insisting that it wasn't, in fact, the flu, and it was different, and it affected people in different ways from the flu, but that we were to prepare for it as though it were some particularly deadly strain, perhaps, of a seasonal flu. And I began to wonder whether would coronavirus become a seasonal issue, or would we find another coronavirus next year, or how exactly was this going to work if we didn't develop a vaccine that was globally available to everyone and was actually being manufactured, actually being administered. And there's a lot of process and procedure questions between the idea of developing a vaccine and the reality of getting it to everyone. But as it turns out, that is a kind of possibility. And we actually, I guess, are going to have to prepare for it. The worst case scenarios, of course, well, they're terrible, but maybe I won't lay them out until Greg has a chance to sort through them and decide how he wants to present these things to you. We'll put an awful lot of responsibility on him for that one. But, you know, it's kind of serious, and it will be with us for a long time, and we'll be watching it for a long time. There are all sorts of ancillary incidents that have cropped up since, of course, and we'll keep an eye on all of those. But, well, we're ready to try and roll here today. Daily Kos Radio being live now. Greg Dworkin joining us right now, actually. But, yeah, as Bill put it this morning, I guess the only way to introduce the topic today, Daily Kos Radio is live now. Dr. Greg Dworkin, who will join me, David Waldman, Kagro X on Twitter, of course, with the latest on COVID-19, which, funny story, turns out isn't funny. So, okay. We'll handle it the best we can, Greg. It's all on you. You're the lone scientist that we speak to, I guess, and not really. Of course, we'll be A, widening the net, I'm sure, and B, it's not your responsibility in the same way that it was, let's say, the President of the United States.
Well, you know, it is what it is, and you do what you can with what you got. So, all right. We're actually going to start with politics first. But there's a reason for that, and that is that the political side of this is going to dictate the response, and therefore I think it's important in keeping up with the entire big picture writ large of coronavirus, of COVID-19, is to keep an eye on the politics.
Okay.
So, for example, Trump now claims he always knew coronavirus would be a pandemic. This is a story in the New York Times.
Right.
The thing I liked about it is that it was introduced to me on Twitter by Brent Staples, a New York Times reporter, who wrote this: "Anatomy of a gratuitous lie. After mocking virus warnings, he claims he knew the danger all along."
Isn't that something? He's so smart. Why did he do that to us?
But I think it's important to do that. This is from The Atlantic, Quinta Jurisic and Ben Wittes, the lawfare folks. Trump seems to be missing his old scandals. Why would the president, in the midst of an enormous public health crisis, want to reignite the story of the Russian collusion investigation that dominated his first 2 years in office?
That's weird.
And the idea here is that he's searching around for an enemy. So he was talking about Clinton's emails just a couple of days ago in the midst of this pandemic. And he misses the rallies where he gets to do that.
Yeah.
But I think the most important practical aspect of this is Fox News, a wonderful story here covered by Molly Jung-Fast.
Yes.
The pandemic is too big for Trump world to spin. And BuzzFeed has a lovely video of the lying hypocrites on Fox switching.
Yes.
And Molly writes, "The moment of transition could perhaps be pinpointed to last Friday, a few days after a Monday show where Trish Reagan said COVID-19 is yet another attempt to impeach the president."
Yes.
Reagan carried on as normal through Thursday, but then, shockingly, on Friday, she was put on hiatus until further notice, and it was head-snapping. Trish had just been carrying water for the administration as she was supposed to, but then out of nowhere, like one of those old inscrutable and unexplained shifts in dogma by the Soviet Politburo, it was decided that no, COVID-19 was actually real. Okay, and the same day that happened, Newt Gingrich wrote an op-ed for Newsweek that said the hardest hit region around Milan has had to improvise its health system, and it's been deeply stressed by the sheer number of patients. All of a sudden, the Trumpists had decided that COVID-19 was a big deal. Evidently, Trump got this change in messaging because 2 days ago, the president was Mr. Serious. "No, I've been urgent. This is urgent for me right from the beginning. You know that because I closed up our country to China." So the point there is that the people at Fox, realizing that it's just a hoax and another way to try to impeach the president line was failing because it just was being overwhelmed by reality, decided to shift this into, actually, he's a war president like President W. Mission accomplished. We all have to rally around the 911 style thing, and the enemy will be the Chinese virus. So every single thing that he said 3 times today, he quoted about the Chinese virus. He's trying to rally his base, a necessary thing to do, because the latest Gallup poll, the Trump-friendly poll, has him dropping 5 points. Trump's drop approval rating slips to 44, and that is strictly because Democrats have stated 7 and Republicans have stated 91. Remember, this is a poll that oversamples Republicans so that they could use the same methodology to compare to their old polls. But the independents have gone from 42 to 35. They've dropped 6. That's 7 points in just in a month, and he's losing the independents. They know that, so they have to rally around this whole war thing, and you're going to see that pushed, and it's nonsense. Of course, the only way that you can be a war president is to win the war. If you lose the war, you're in big trouble. And the economy doesn't really pay any attention to this, and neither does the virus. So, it's not going to work, but he will push it. And in the process of pushing it, ugly things are going to surface because that's what happens when you have xenophobia. There was a report from one of the White House reporters, which I don't have at my fingertips, but I saw yesterday, who, from what I could gather, and I could be wrong, but certainly she's Asian. I think she's Chinese.
Yes.
But was interviewing somebody off record, and that person said to her face, "We will beat this Kung flu." To her face, they said that. And, it's incredibly hurtful and xenophobic, but I'm just saying it's going to be coming, and they're not going to stop because they're too stupid to.
Yeah. Well, I saw a lot of people reacting to this stuff, and I think reacting properly, pointing out that, remember, keep in mind, I mean, it's right to be angry about it, but they're doing this to give us some other thing to get riled up about, other than the fact.
Well,
that
it's to rally their
killing
base.
us all.
They don't really care about us. They never have. They don't really care about what the media thinks. They never have. They certainly don't care about you. They're too stupid to care about independence. They only care about their base, and their base loves it. But that's not the point, and it's never been the point. And nothing makes that more obvious than what we're seeing with this pandemic, which doesn't care about any of it.
Their base enjoys seeing, liberals owned. The libs got owned, so they love to do. The racism charges them up, but what excites their base is upsetting and hurting other people.
Right. So here's the reality. The reality is, so we had this Democratic primary yesterday.
Sometimes.
And despite the fact that the coronavirus is making people stay home, we're seeing record turnouts in some places. And that's partly because there's so much early vote these days and vote in by mail that even the suppression of the same-day vote by the virus still leaves us with a record turnout. Illinois was only down by 75%. They don't have much early voting. But Arizona, and which ignored everything, and even the same-day vote was pretty strong, had a record turnout, I believe. I have to see the final numbers. And I think Florida as well, although Florida's was probably based on that early vote. But nonetheless, Jason Johnson, for example, tweeted this morning, turnout in the 2020 Arizona primary that Joe Biden won, because Joe Biden won them all, by the way, has exceeded 2016 numbers despite coronavirus and attempts at digital voter suppression. Seems for now voter enthusiasm won't be a problem for Democrats with Biden as a nominee. Let's see who he picks as his vice president, because I saw Amy Klobuchar floated. I like Amy, but I think he'd be better off with Kamala Harris. Why not Stacey Abrams? I personally happen to like the whole idea of experience, and I don't think she has enough federal experience. That's my own personal preference.
Okay.
But, Harris would do it. There's other women of color who are senators, perhaps, that, could be thought about. But setting that aside for the moment, Joe is the nominee, and he would do well to let Bernie land the plane. There's already an announcement from Bernie's campaign manager that they're reassessing the situation and they have to speak with their supporters to figure out where they're going from here.
Okay.
So that's encouraging. He may take longer to do it than we wish. That's not really the point either. It's not up to me. It's up to him. But the fact of the matter is the plane is out of gas and he better land it.
Well, yeah, you have to then. If you're out of gas.
Right? You don't want to crash. So just land the plane. And I would rather he do it sooner. But it doesn't matter. Joe Biden's going to ignore him. The rest of us are going to ignore Bernie supporters. If we are not happy with the, no, you can't win until you get your exact number of delegates nonsense. Plenty of candidates in this campaign, remember we started with 372 of them, have already pulled out. And so there's no law that says you have to go all the way to the convention. If you try that, you're only going to get shunned. And so fine, whatever. Do what you need to do to get it in your own head that you haven't won. And people will be in different spaces and have a different path to that. I'm being overly harsh. I do advocate being nice to Bernie supporters, but it's over.
Okay.
So start with that as your premise and then go from there. So why is it important? Biden has to concentrate on beating Donald Trump, and he also has to concentrate on his own coronavirus response, because since none of us can believe what the White House says, they all lie, and they're trying to turn it into a xenophobic movement. We have to rely on the scientists, the public health people, and to a certain extent, if you want a political response, you have to look to Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi. So that brings me to my next topic. So what's the response supposed to be? Well, Congress has to get its act together and start saving us from the Great Depression that's coming.
Oh.
Why do I say Great Depression? Stephen Mnuchin told the Republicans in Congress, you better pass the House bill or there's going to be 20% unemployment. We've got to work on the Senate bill to help prevent that. Now, 20% unemployment, that's kind of high. And yet we're seeing unemployment requests in every state go up this week by tremendous amounts because of the stay-at-home effect on the economy. So we know that's coming. It's not unreal. I don't know about the 20% thing. I can't tell if the 20% is because they think that or because they need to tell Republicans that, because that's the only way to turn them all into democratic socialists for 2 weeks. I don't know. It's impossible to tell because they all lie. But the message that Mnuchin was trying to push is part of that whole switch that Molly was describing on Fox News, where you're going from it's nothing to, oh my gosh, it's everything.
Yes.
And so this is what we need. We need that congressional response. Now, Jake Sherman in Playbook today, and I usually just ignore Playbook over at Politico, but this is good.
I read the articles.
I've been through a few of these. We occasionally, you don't look at the pictures. I've been through a few of those.
Yes.
We occasionally have these great crises, and when they occur, we're able to rise above our normal partisanship and many times our normal positions because these are not ordinary times. That's Mitch McConnell. And Jake Sherman writes, Mitch McConnell is right. Typically, during true national emergencies, Congress sheds its deep-seated partisanship and rises to the occasion to deliver what the country needs. In other words, their main job is getting themselves reelected, and then every once in a while they have time for the rest of us. But the coronavirus is the first large-scale crisis in a political era without historical parallel, and it will test the efficiency of our government and the theory that elected representatives will respond in a timely and adequate manner. Consider the last two crises were 9/11 and the financial crisis. Congressional approval was 42% on 9/11, and McCain-Obama issued a joint statement in financial crisis urging action. Compare that to today. To put it mildly, we're in a different political era. Can you imagine Joe Biden and Donald Trump issuing a joint announcement?
No.
Okay, and if any of you say, well, why not Bernie Sanders and make it a trio? You didn't pay attention to the first part of my segment. It falls to McConnell and Chuck Schumer, the Senate Minority Leader from New York, to cobble together what might be one of the largest and most expansive emergency spending packages in American history. But McConnell and Schumer are playing two very different hands. McConnell stood aside during the Phase 2 talks, preferring Pelosi, who cut a deal with Mnuchin, and now with financial markets selling off, by the way, the Dow Jones futures are down again before the market opens in 20 minutes. Last I checked, it was down 800 points. Although Clorox is doing well.
Oh, good.
But, the point that Jake Sherman is making is that this was a Democratic deal, and McConnell, as he put it, was left asking Republicans to gag and vote for the bill. So the Democrats were in the good position, and they could get their bill passed. I mean, it still has to be done, but the markets are assuming that they will. And McConnell can't afford politically the same inaction this time around. In other words, if he doesn't do anything, the Democrats will write the bill again. And this one is for the $1 trillion one that Mnuchin wants. So the majority leader is making it very clear that he's taking charge of this Phase 3 talk and will be the center of gravity in the upcoming negotiations. McConnell's first task is to find consensus among Republicans as the government gears up to spend north of $1 trillion.
Right. That's Mitch McConnell asking for favorable treatment for his plan on the show right now. I don't think it's going to work.
Consensus is important for McConnell because he has a less than optimal hand here.
That seems true.
He'll need 60 votes, and the only person who can give him that is Schumer.
Yes.
And that's why the minority has a big say right now. House Democrats will also need to pass the bill, which also strengthens Schumer's hand. His challenge will be to pare down the wish list to a few achievables and quickly. And worth noting, markets seem to have baked this in that the bill will pass by Friday or Monday. That's possible, but far from a sure thing. Congress is working under exceedingly tight circumstances. So basically, if McConnell doesn't want a Democratic bill, what he's got to do is round up the Republicans, get Rand Paul out of the room, and say, we're doing this. I didn't ask you.
Okay, yes.
And put together a Republican proposal and then negotiate with Schumer to get enough Democratic votes to pass it. In other words, normal Senate politics. But he's got to do it in a really quick period of time. And the Democrats will have an alternative ready if this fails. So McConnell knows that he's under pressure to do something that looks like Republican.
Yeah, I don't know what that even looks like, but okay.
I don't know. Nobody knows what it looks like. We have an idea of what Schumer's is going to look like because, he'll put that together. But the Congress is going to act relatively quickly because it's now in their best interest to do so, is what I'm trying to say. Whereas before, Democrats thought it was really important to do something fast, and Republicans couldn't be convinced. Well, now Trump is convinced. Trump has only failed in convincing people like Rand Paul and Louis Gohmert,
yes,
who tend to delay things for no good reason, for theatrics because they think that's the most important, because I don't know why. But we're moving beyond that, and so we'll have something, and at least the politics of all of this, including Trump's dropping numbers that I presented to you, is why Republicans are getting off their butts and starting to do stuff. I'd like to tell you it's because they recognize the seriousness of it, but that's not how Congress acts.
No, not typically. Not those guys, anyway.
Not those guys.
All right. What else?
Well, there's the actual pandemic, but this is the politics of it all.
Yes, right. Well, we do have that issue. So, all right, Rand Paul. By the way, I am now endorsing Rand Paul's neighbor for Senate. I think
for anything.
I might have had it right. So.
Yeah. So all of that. So let's look at the pandemic itself. The good news is it's Wednesday, and when I was with you on Monday, it wasn't even clear at the time we did our show, although I haven't listened to it, and it was like a year and a half ago, so I don't remember what I said. But I don't think it was clear Monday morning just how much the country was going to shut down. And they did. And there's been some amazing reactions to it in many places. Now, one thing that Mike Osterholm from CIDREP made this point, and I agree with it. You're not seeing uniform response everywhere across the country. And that's probably a good thing. And here's why. Again, the economy is a big part of this. Maybe you should have Arliss Bunny to explain the economic side, because I don't pretend to be an economics whiz on the internets. But it's clearly important in terms of what happens to the economy, and that's why these bills are so important. But while this is going on, the country needs to flatten the curve. People in Brooklyn, New York, were hanging at the window yelling at people on the street, "Go home, flatten the curve. Go home, flatten the curve." I mean, it's gotten into the psyche of America that we have to do this, and people are starting to do this. But by looking at the numbers and seeing where it's regional, New York and Washington hard hit, California hard hit, Massachusetts hard hit, Connecticut is starting to feel the hit here, but not so much Oklahoma and other places around the country. So economically, they can still do stuff and send it to us, and we have to hunker down, and then hopefully we'll be unhunkering, and then when they are, we can sort of trade. So maybe we can pass the ventilators back and forth, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it's okay to look at it as a regional response. Everybody doesn't have to do the same thing at once, but you do have to do it based on the amount of virus you have in your community documented, and that approach requires that you are able to test properly. And those tests are coming on, as we predicted. It's now up to about 10,000 tests a day. That's like 10 times better, 20 times better than it was last week. So the testing capacity is improving. In my community, there's drive-by test centers by doctor's note that you can get. If your doc feels you need to be tested, it's still several day turnaround time before you get the test results, but the test numbers will go up in Connecticut because of that, because we now have testing. These are being sent to the private labs. And yes, there's a whole discussion to be had about the fact that this was delayed because of Trump, and so he should be blamed for it. But nonetheless, this is coming online, and that's good news. So each individual region will be able to get a sense of what they need to do, and what they need to do is get it done and get it done early. The United Kingdom, somebody had asked me to talk about their approach. I don't need to, because they've abandoned it and they're going to join ours. And part of the reason is that there was an Imperial College report that came out over the weekend that Trump read and the Fox News people read that said this is pretty dire and you better do something. And that's what put everybody on the same page. We may need to do that after the break because it's coming up in 2 minutes.
True.
But I have this piece here from the MIT Press called "Flattening the Coronavirus Curve is Not Enough. Addressing the growing pandemic requires a new mindset and requires it quickly." And here's the point. There's two things you need to think about here, these challenges. We need to minimize the short-term cost of the pandemic, that is to say this year's, but we also need to minimize the medium-term cost of the pandemic, which is after this year. And the two are in conflict with one another. So if you flatten the curve, you stop it all from happening at once, but you also lengthen the time that it's going to take place. So you have to plan for that too. And you can't relax too soon or it comes back.
Yes.
And we've seen that with Taiwan and with China. So we have to worry about that. And at the same time, we have to have a realistic sense of what the flattening the curve will give us. And to jump ahead and give you a little foreshadowing, if you do it in a mild fashion, it's not going to be enough. And if you do it in a severe fashion, it still might not be enough.
Okay. So, yeah, we face some problems in deciding how to approach this. The news is not great on that front, but, science, you're going to have to.
But that's why the schools have to close. And guess what? They're going to close for the rest of the year. Kansas has already done that. I'm telling you now, everybody's going to get to the point where they're going to close school for the rest of the year.
Yeah.
Plan for it in your head. Get used to it.
Right.
New normal.
I don't think we were there yet, and we're all homeschoolers now, so I guess get used to that as well.
Well, the good news is there's been a whole industry about how to do that. So as long as the internet stays up, you're in good shape.
Yeah, I guess so. I wonder how, Betsy DeVos is taking this. I mean, she might be thrilled to death, the idea that everybody's forced into homeschooling. And there is a whole industry out there, but although it is, I guess, dominated by those who would provide materials to you, useful primarily, if not only, to indoctrinate kids in a certain way.
Well, there's some good news. Italy might be getting past the peak, but we'll deal with a lot of this after the break.
All right. Well, we'll deal with that. Yeah, they may be getting past the peak. At the same time, I have open the news of second waves of illness in Asia, where they thought that they might be reaching the end of the tunnel. So, there's good and there's bad. Segue into what's coming up after the break. We'll take 2 minutes, and I'll be right back. I got to make a vaccine and cure the virus. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to Patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Tell us more, why don't you?
Well, one of the things that really gave me a good laugh, of course I'm from New York and I appreciate these things, is Chris Cuomo having Andrew Cuomo on CNN, his brother, and them ragging on each other about, who mom liked best, like the old Smothers Brothers. And it was great. And the expressions on Chris Cuomo's face was just classic when Andrew was talking.
Yes, certainly it seems like a routine they've worked on. Not that it was planned that way, but that they've been through this before. It's a real thing. Brothers do it all the time. So that was kind of funny. And if it wasn't for the fact that they had a structure imposed on them by commercial breaks and timing of the broadcast, I imagine that could have gone on forever. They both seem like they might be well-practiced last word freaks. So.
Yep. So all of that. This is one of our commenters wrote on the Pundit Roundup this morning. In these dark days of social distancing, I never expected the Cuomo brothers to be the ones to lift me out of the fog. So it is with some befuddlement I report that there's a clip circulating of CNN host Chris Cuomo and his brother, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, who, by the way, gave a fantastic press conference revealing what it's like to have a leader with empathy. In the midst of an actual pandemic, bickering on air about which one of their mother's favorite. And it's the first thing that really made me laugh in days. If you two could use some warped joy in your coronavirus bunker, I highly recommend that you give it a watch.
All right.
So, Andrew Cuomo gave a great press conference, and he talked about how difficult this is. And, it affects him. It affects his ability to see his family. He gets it, and we'll get through this. And that's in the process of listing just how dire it might be in about 2 weeks for New York. He, for example, predicted that the peak isn't going to hit for another month. Maybe even longer than that. Yes. He used 45 days. I'm not sure if it's that long. But 45 days is true if you can flatten the curve.
Yeah, that's part of flattening the curve. We're trying to do that.
Right. So this is Jeremy Young talking about the Imperial College report that came out over the weekend.
Yes, okay.
We can now read the Imperial College report on COVID-19, coronavirus, that led to the extreme measures we've seen in the U.S. this week. Read it. It's terrifying. I'll offer a summary in this thread. The Imperial College team plugged infection and death rates from China, Korea, and Italy into epidemic modeling software and ran a simulation. What happens if the U.S. does absolutely nothing? If we treat it like the flu, go about our business, and let the virus take its course. In other words, if you follow Trump's initial advice.
Yeah, sounds good, right?
Right. Here's what would happen. 80% of Americans would get the disease. 0.9% of them would die. So that 1% case fatality rate is what they're using. That's what we all said is probably what's going on here. Between 4 and 8% of all Americans over the age of 70 would die. And 2.2 million Americans would die. 2.2 million Americans.
Is that a bad
Spanish
thing?
flu killed, 670,000.
I saw
2.2 million.
Some celebrities making videos the other day said, death is inevitable. So apparently they have to pull back from that one.
Most of them are young.
Right.
It gets worse. People with severe COVID-19, coronavirus, need to be put on ventilators. 50% of those on ventilators die, and the other 50% live. But in an unmitigated epidemic, the need for ventilators would be 30 times the number available in the U.S. And 100% of those patients die.
Well, we ordered a large number, so.
On Amazon, right. I'm just waiting for them to come. But it's okay, because I did Prime, so it should be here soon. So the actual death toll from the virus would be closer to 4 million.
That's
in 3
larger
months.
than 2.2, almost twice as large as that.
8 to 15% of all Americans over 70 would die if they do nothing. And doing nothing was the British approach.
Yes, right.
Up until this weekend, and they read this report.
What? Why? Maybe we should have done something. By the way, remember that initially they were exempted from the travel ban because of the great job they were doing in controlling coronavirus.
So how many is 4 million people? It's more Americans than have died all at once from anything ever. It's the population of L.A. It's 4 times the number of Americans who died in the Civil War, both sides combined. It's 2/3 as many people as died in the Holocaust.
Did you just both sides this?
Yeah, and I also did the Holocaust, but then again, I'm allowed because, Godwin's law is suspended.
You really got it all.
Americans make up 4.4% of the world's population. If we extrapolate that to the rest of the world, with a large margin of error,
Okay.
that's 90 million deaths.
That seems like, I don't know.
It's a lot of people. So countries won't stand by and do nothing, right? So the Imperial College then ran the numbers again, and this time assuming a mitigation strategy.
That's the one.
All symptomatic cases in the U.S. in isolation, families of those quarantine, and everybody over 70 stay home.
All right.
This mitigation strategy is what you've seen a lot of people talking about when they say we should flatten the curve. Not us. We're talking about doing more, so there's some hope here. Try to slow the spread of the disease to the people most likely to die from it to avoid overwhelming hospitals. In other words, go out and party in those Florida beaches because you're young and invulnerable, and even if you get sick, you're not that sick.
Right.
And that does flatten the curve, but not enough. The death rate from the disease is cut in half, but it still kills 1 million Americans, 1.1 to be exact. The peak need for ventilators falls by 2/3, which is good, but it still exceeds the number by 8 times instead of 30.
Wow. Okay.
So that leaves the actual death toll still at 2 million.
Oh.
The population of Houston instead of L.A. Two
L.A.
cities,
likes it.
one on each side.
Okay.
1/3 of the Holocaust. Globally, 45 million people die instead of 90. 3/4 of World War II. And that's what happens if we rely on mitigation and, quote, common sense, end quote. Like, don't go out if you're sick, as if people would do that. We'll get to that, too.
All right.
Finally,
Yes.
The Imperial College team ran the numbers again, assuming a suppression strategy. And that is, in fact, what we are doing. So ignore those first two. That's not going to happen, I don't think, I hope, because we're doing suppression. And what do I mean by suppression? Look around you.
Voter suppression.
Restaurants close. You can only do takeout, that kind of thing. No bars on St. Patrick's Day. No parades. Thank you very much, Bill de Blasio, for finally being forced to do the right thing against your better judgment, because your judgment stinks. I'm a New Yorker. That's how we talk about the mayor. Isolate symptomatic cases, quarantine their family members, social distancing for the whole population, all public gatherings shut down, schools and universities closed. That's what we're doing.
We are.
Okay? And suppression works. The death rate in the U.S. peaks 3 weeks from now at a few thousand and then goes down.
Okay.
What an enormous difference.
I'll take that.
We hit but don't exceed the number of available ventilators. The nightmarish death tolls in the rest of the study disappear. That's why we're doing what we're doing. And we already started doing that because the mayors and the governors were smarter than the administration. They read this paper and got on board. So did Fox News.
Yes.
Now, here's the catch.
All right.
If you relax the suppression before the vaccine is administered, then it comes back.
Yeah. What vaccine?
We don't have it yet. So we're talking about a year.
Yes, that's the worst thing I've ever heard.
That's the worst thing and the best thing.
I don't know what to tell you. Yeah.
The best scenario has the worst scenario, and that is that it's going to continue for a long time. There may be, again, regional areas where you can stop. That's why by then we'll have testing so you can actually know it's in the area, so we won't be flying blind. So, it's semi-good news. So coronavirus comes right back and kills millions of Americans in a few months, same as before if you don't do this. And part of what the MIT report was trying to talk about in terms of short-term and medium-term is that if you get sick and then recover, you're good and you don't have to worry about that. But if you succeed in keeping the virus away from people, they don't have a chance to get sick and recover and do the natural vaccine. And so you don't have as many of them. And that's why they're still vulnerable, and that's why it comes back if you relax.
Yes. Are we finding, though, that the people are coming away? Well, do we know?
It's a model. So for the assumption is that if you get it, then you're fine for short term.
Okay. There was some question about that early, but we didn't.
There's always going to be questions. It's like this isn't an aerosol virus, but on rare occasion it might be. Okay. For the most part, if you get chickenpox, you don't get it again, except for the people that do.
Yeah.
I mean, there's always going to be exceptions. Don't let that interfere with the modeling right now.
All right.
Because it'll spoil my segment. No, because we don't even know that the few cases, those may be the exceptions that prove the rule. And so I wouldn't, worry about that for the moment. There's other things to worry about.
Okay.
The concept simply is if you get people to get through this, then they're better off at the other end. And that was part of the UK approach, which was so stupid because they sort of misfigured how big the peak would be.
That was the Rick Santelli program. Everybody get it. Have a chickenpox party.
Back to Jeremy Young interpreting the Imperial Report. And by the way, the head of the Imperial Report is a fellow named Neil Ferguson. He's self-quarantined because he's got a cough and high fever.
Okay. Well, he's got plenty of time to work then.
And by the way, diarrhea is a big part of this.
Is it? I thought it was
symptom.
Not.
So that's why the toilet paper.
Crap. Well, duh.
Yeah, exactly. So after the first suppression period ends in July, we could probably lift restrictions, Jeremy says, for a month, followed by 2 more months of suppression in a repeating pattern. So it's 2 months on, 1 month off.
Oh, great.
Then you don't trigger an outbreak. And stack breaks by city could do better. Again, as I said at the beginning, it's a regional thing. The U.S. is so big, it doesn't hit in the same place at the same time, just like flu. Flu, we've told you for years, if you listen to the show, here in Connecticut, we watch the illnesses come from New York City, and they go up 684, and they go off exit 9, and then they take 84 to Hartford and then to Boston. And that's been the pattern for years and years and years. And the point of all of that is that you can see it coming, but it's not all at the moment at the same time. One place is a week ahead of another place. And that'll be the case here, too. So, yeah, there's some regional stuff, and staggering breaks by city could do better. But we simply cannot ever allow the virus to spread the entire population in the way other viruses do because it's too deadly. So you can't treat it like flu in that regard. If lots of people we know end up getting coronavirus, it means millions of Americans are dying. It simply can't be allowed to happen. And how quickly will a vaccine be here? Last week, 3 separate research teams announced they developed vaccines. Yesterday, one of them, with FDA approval, injected the vaccine into a person.
Oh.
No animal testing. Extreme measure, but necessary.
Okay.
Now, remember, when they pushed the swine flu vaccine very quickly in, I think, 76 with Gerald Ford.
The first swine flu. The old one,
The old swine flu. People started getting Guillain-Barré from, we don't know why. Was it the vaccine or was it just coincidence? We don't know. It's still being debated. But there's reasons not to rush, except in this case, there's reasons to rush. So that's why they call it an extreme measure, but necessary.
All right.
Now, they have to monitor the test subject for 14 months to make sure the vaccine is safe. That part can't be rushed. If you're going to inoculate all humans, you have to make absolutely sure the vaccine won't kill them.
Yeah.
Right? It probably won't, but you have to be sure.
I would.
He said that.
I'm in favor.
He's right.
That. Yeah.
He's got a point there.
You should be sure.
But that's why you have to. That's why Tony Fauci says you can't rush this.
Yes.
It's going to be 12 to 18 months. Well, can't you rush it? He said, well, maybe 12 to 16 months. Assuming the vaccine is safe and effective, it still takes several months to produce enough to inoculate the global population. And for this reason, the Imperial College team estimated 18 months until the vaccine is available.
All right.
During those 18 months, and again, you can maybe cut it to 14, things are going to be very difficult and very scary. So we got a year and a half of this ahead of us.
Yeah.
Our economy and society will be disrupted in profound ways, and if suppression actually works, it'll feel like we're doing this for nothing because infection and death rates will remain low. It's easy to get people to come together in common sacrifice in the middle of war. It's hard to get them to do so in a pandemic that looks invisible precisely because suppression methods are working. Remember Y2K?
Yeah.
Did it work? Well, we didn't have a problem. Then you were overhyping it. No, it didn't have a problem because we did all this stuff.
Yes, this will be difficult, especially as the deprivations go on.
Right. The Imperial College team plugged infection and death rates from China, Korea, Italy into this, and so that's how we get all of this. And it's important. So just keep all of this in mind when you're trying to interpret what's going on. Why do we go through this? We have to prepare ourselves mentally for this going on longer than we would have thought. It's not just 2 weeks, however this turns out. But I also wanted to give you a clue as to why all of a sudden Friday, Monday Trump was way different than last week Trump.
Yes.
Which he will pretend that he knew this all along.
That's amazing.
And it's like I meant to do that.
I guess. And it hasn't lasted either. And amazingly, there are personalities on television who give cues to large segments of the viewing audience about how to react to what President Trump is doing, saying that his presidential demeanor has continued into Tuesday, which is not true. And
he does it for brief segments of 30 seconds and thinks that's enough, and then goes back to his usual self.
Right.
Again, I say this with all due respect to the office of the President of the United States. Get this asshole off the stage and do not have him say anything other than, I'd like to introduce Tony Fauci. Then shut up and leave.
Well, you know how it is with this guy.
But the problem is when he leaves and he goes and tweets and starts attacking governors.
Right.
Only Democratic ones, though.
Yes, right, of course. The Republican ones are properly concerned.
I mean, he's terrified. He's terrified of the virus. He's a germaphobe, but he's also terrified of losing the election, which is likely to happen. I mean, this guy is Herbert Hoover. He's going to be presiding over a big recession, if not a depression.
Mm-hmm. But it's China's fault.
But it's China's fault is going to be his answer, and that's not going to work with 2/3 of the population. It's only going to work with his base.
Even if it works, I mean, it's him admitting that we just lost a gigantic trade war to China, which is easy to win.
Now, let's do one final segment here because this is, I think, important, and it's about masks.
Oh, now we're going to do something important. All right.
All right. And so the whole idea of telling people not to wear masks was a decent one, but it assumes something that isn't real, and that is that people would listen.
Oh, well, all right. Shoo, I thought it was something esoteric and weird that I couldn't imagine. Yes,
Well,
all right.
all this
that's
other
true.
stuff that we've just been telling you for the last 45 minutes, is that enough to get you not to go party in Florida on the beaches because you're 25 or 18 and you think that you're invulnerable?
You have convinced me I'm not 18.
So people go out anyway. So this is
Yeah.
Scott Gottlieb, who's been pretty on the money about where things are going here.
Okay.
And he writes, if the concern is that asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic younger Americans, which is to say millennials and Gen Zers, are continuing to spread coronavirus because they don't heed warnings, look at the Florida beaches, you could require anybody between certain ages to wear a procedure mask when they go out.
Okay.
So, look, if the alternative is saying you have to shelter in place, like they're saying in San Francisco and New York.
Yeah.
And I'm not a lawyer. I don't play one on the internet any more than I play an economics guru. But the civil liberties issues are certainly real, even though, perhaps taking a backseat at the moment because they haven't happened. And Gottlieb is saying there's an alternative. Since people are going to break curfew, instead of arresting them and throwing them together in a jail cell and therefore doing the opposite of social distancing, and P.S., don't forget the jails in all of this, if we're at the point of locking down entire cities, we must consider other ways to break off transmission that don't take away people's liberty. CDC's current position is that people should only wear a mask when you're sick, but we know it's spread by asymptomatic people. So any ordinance, and we didn't know that at the time,
True.
that people said don't wear masks.
Right.
Any ordinance would have to specify procedure masks and not N95 masks, that is to say the little surgical ones that people wear below their nose in an incorrect fashion, which are in short supply and needed by healthcare workers. The healthcare workers get the N95s, including the industrial ones, and the populace gets the procedure masks, which ought to be simple enough to make, so you divert industry in the U.S., which is currently idle because of poor demand, to then reorient and make these masks.
Yes.
This does not appear to be a shortage of these, and these masks are still very helpful in preventing spread through droplets. Actually, there is a shortage, but we could fix that.
That's what I thought I heard.
People should still be required to stay home if sick, but that's hard to enforce. Requiring a procedure mask for those who go out in areas of sustained spread like big cities would be a second layer of protection when people are asymptomatic or defiant. And people are both.
Yeah,
Right? They are. I mean, they're certainly defiant, and a lot of them are asymptomatic. And asymptomatic doesn't mean you can't spread disease. Apparently, studies suggest that actually you can. So the idea that, like flu, you're only sick a day before you actually have symptoms isn't true with this. And therefore, there's more of a rationale for wearing a mask than there was at the beginning when people gave you different advice. Again, everything about the coronavirus that is causing this particular pandemic is new. And as we get more information, we learn more. That's why testing is so goddamn important. And the fact that even the advice changes doesn't mean CDC was wrong. It means we have better advice and we're adjusting. Again, these are the early exit polls.
Yes, okay. Understandable. And that's the biggest point there that hasn't yet sunk in with most people, that you can have it and be asymptomatic. You can spread it when you're asymptomatic. And I don't.
That's
know if
why we don't
everyone
want
knows
you
what
out
that
partying.
is. Right. Yeah, I'm fine. I don't even have a fever. Right. So people just figure there's no way. Of course, I guess they have in their mind the risk of contracting it. But for right now, I'm not doing anything wrong. If I get sick, that's on me. So I can do this.
This happened before we had all of this advice here. But there was a foreign exchange student.
Throw them out.
Who was in Westport, Connecticut.
Yes.
Who was on the way to go home.
See, all right.
So his host family had a party for him, a going away party.
Hooray.
And this was a couple of weeks ago before, people were told not to do this. Yes. So they didn't do anything against advice. We just didn't know.
Right.
So the kid goes home and then reports, by the way, now that I got home, I don't feel good.
Uh-huh.
And it turned out that somebody at the party also started not to feel good.
Yes.
And now we've got 20 people in that cluster alone in Westport, Connecticut. So that's why the Connecticut numbers went up.
Okay.
And that's what happens when you party.
I guess so. Like Mar-a-Lago.
Don't party.
Guess not. Or have CPAC, or have everybody go together at Mar-a-Lago, all these
Right.
things.
Now, Zeynep Tufekci wrote a very nice opinion piece in the New York Times today telling people why they don't need masks, and it sort of backfired. And she said the messaging was wrong, and we have to distinguish between N95 masks that healthcare providers need because of added protection and procedure masks, which could still help prevent transmission. So what Zeynep was talking about is the messaging, the weird messaging that masks are completely unhelpful, so don't buy them because healthcare workers need them. Well, why does it work for healthcare workers but not the rest of the population?
Yeah, that was but they need.
I mean, people could sort of understand healthcare workers first in a crisis when you don't have enough.
Yeah.
But the logic behind it wasn't clear.
Yes.
It tried to be clear. It said it doesn't prevent you from getting disease. So at a time that we didn't know about the asymptomatic spread, it made sense. It doesn't make sense anymore.
Okay.
People who stockpiled N95 masks should donate them to their local hospital. When they do, they can be given a replacement stock of procedure masks. Except we don't have enough. He's wrong about that. CDC guidance recommends people symptomatic with flu wear a mask if you have to travel outside. Since we know there can be asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic spread, masks could help reduce transmission. Remember, prior guidance in U.S. discouraged the mask, but it was at a time when there was probably hundreds and low thousands of cases at most, and officials maintained there wasn't community spread. Now there are clear hotspots and sustained transmission. Risk has grown. Message needs to change, is what he's saying. And that's logical, and that makes sense. So I wanted to cover that because that's been a bone of contention. And again, if you don't explain in a completely transparent way why you said what you said, then your credibility is gone, and then you can't say anything else, and nobody's going to pay attention to you. Look at the White House.
Yes. Well, true. That's why we spend occasionally, like 2 hours explaining, well, you need 60 votes, but not really exactly, and why you get hung up on.
Because you need to know, because your credibility is on the line. You said this, but you didn't listen to the whole show where I explained it in detail.
I'm sorry it took 2 hours, but it really does mean that we have to split a lot of hairs here, and things can change. And
right, at the moment, Mitch McConnell needs 60 votes, so he needs Chuck Schumer. Could he change that? I suppose.
Sure.
But he hasn't wanted to. He hasn't even wanted to, be in session.
Right. So sometimes we'll have to work around him on that one.
And by the way, I still don't understand why the Senate left for the weekend. I don't get it. I can't think of a single reason why that was a good idea. From spreading it and bringing it back to Washington, to all the old people that are in the Senate, to the legislative end of it, I don't know what the hell they were doing.
Yeah, I don't know. They still don't know. They still have Rand Paul running around and pretending that this is something that it would be funny to delay.
Right. Is this Thursday, Senate, before that report came out? Because there were other reports saying similar things. I don't understand why they didn't pay attention to those, but apparently everybody's paying attention to this one. Maybe because it's a British accent and a monocle, and therefore they must be a lot more intelligent than us because look at the accent. I don't know what it is, but whatever it was, maybe they didn't believe China. Maybe they are really that xenophobic and stupid.
That could be.
But the UK is saying it. And so, maybe if this study had come out of Norway early, we would have been in a better position. I don't know. But I still can't figure out what the heck the Senate was doing and what the rationale is.
I don't know. I guess it's just a matter of no one can make us do something different, so we're going to do our thing. Which is
it takes something. Somebody had to, slap McConnell upside the head and say, listen, pay attention. This is really serious, and you getting reelected won't matter if you're all dead. Yeah. Because if you're all dead and all your members are over 90, you got to do something, including yourself. You ain't no spring chicken, Mitch.
Right. Well, he's not used to being told that there are outside influences that can make him do things differently. And a lot of people, let's say a lot of people going into the weekend, there were still a lot of people in America that thought, well, I know they're saying it was an emerging conventional wisdom that
but the governor of Oklahoma says go out to dinner.
Yeah. Right. So there was a lot of bad advice even going into the weekend, and lots of people who knew that it was probably unwise to do some, say, large gathering or whatever. But I've had this scheduled forever, and it's important to me anyway. And so they said, well, we'll just sneak one more in, I guess. And that's really, I guess, what led to this Senate weekend. I got to go to Kentucky because Brett Kavanaugh is coming because a friend of his is having a party. All right. That's important in their worlds.
Right. Anyway, so that's the story. Should I dare look? I suppose I can dare look. Let's go see what the Dow Jones is doing at the moment. Oh, it's only down 4.6% at 983 negative.
All right. Good day.
So let's just point out a whole bunch of stuff that Steve Mnuchin and Donald Trump said at the press conference was supposed to fix the markets, and it hasn't. We knew that was going to happen.
Yeah, he was sure he was going to fix it.
But it's about to drop below 20,000, which it might do today. And by the way, once it hits below 20,000, we're essentially at where Trump was when he took office. So every gain that Trump made in his entire presidency has been wiped out. I just point that out for electoral college reasons, because Trump is running on the economy.
Oh. Yes.
Not that the stock market is the economy, but the unemployment numbers are going to go up. You know how if you get a single case, there's really 100 in your community?
Yes.
For every unemployment claim last week, there's going to be 100 this week.
Yeah. Right. And I did see some interesting problems
we have those numbers already.
People. Right. Well, we're getting results that people are having to apparently I saw something circulate on Twitter. Somebody said that somebody else was laid off by Marriott in particular, and that they had gone to register for UI, and Marriott said, we didn't lay you off, you're just on a 0-hour schedule this week.
Right, we just don't pay you.
Yeah.
So let me read to you some of these numbers because we have some of them.
Yes.
And this is from the pundit report. Providence, more than 6,000 Rhode Islanders filed for unemployment on Monday.
It's the whole state.
Right. Boston, on Monday, a single day, 19,884 people filed new unemployment claims in Massachusetts. In the entire month of February, there were only 17,000. Right. Okay. Unemployment claims filed in Ohio. Last Sunday, 536. This Sunday, 11,995. And on Monday, 36,645. You get the idea here?
Yes.
Remember the chessboard and the 2 pieces, 1 rice, 2 rice, 4 rice, 8 rice? This is bad. And then I want to finally finish with, we do have that citizens guide that we put together. That's on the Pundit Roundup, and I'll give it to you. We put that together in 2007, 2009. It's got a lot of useful stuff for home, how to prepare, and it'll get your head wrapped around what you need to do.
Okay, we'll take a look for it, and stay at home, everybody. Thanks, Greg. You stay home, too.
I'll do that.
All right, welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Did everybody take the 1-minute break to buy the dip, as the other dip, Eric Trump, advised everybody? I think during one of the first downward spirals. This one just seems to be continuing on, and I'm not going to keep an eye on things all day long, but I can say, well, there are some relative bargains out there relative, say, to the price at which I had seen these stocks even earlier this week, much less a month ago. But I don't know. I just don't know if it's going to stop going down at this point. So risky strategy, but it is out there, and people have occasionally said that it was a wise one, but I don't think they ever did it in a situation quite like this one. All right. Many different directions to go today. I will include for you in the roundup, I am sure, the video about which Greg spoke earlier on in his segment. This being circulated, is it Andrew Kaczynski that helped put this thing together? Yeah. Over at the Washington Post, the video team that he's just giving it its props. He's of course over at CNN now. I've got his current assignments backwards, but he's giving props, as the kids say, to the Washington Post video team that put together, as he said, a damning indictment of Fox News and their treatment of the coronavirus story. It's long for us to play on the air, but suffice to say, it is, let's say about a half dozen or so of their most prominent hosts downplaying coronavirus, and then a few days later going through that whiplash and announcing the seriousness of which they were aware all along of the coronavirus crisis and how dangerous it can really be. So we'll share it with you. If you haven't seen it yet, I don't even know how that's possible, but we'll make it possible for you to check in on it. Let's see. There's about 50 things that need to be pursued from this, and one of them, of course, I should have made a note for myself, was of particular interest and is from a couple of days ago, and I don't even really know if I can turn it up at this point or even bring to mind what it was exactly that I needed to remind you of. So, okay, we'll just do it in reverse chronological order. Let's see. I have two reports. I think one, the more accessible than the other, is from The Verge. I also have one from a place called Tech Dirt. This is just sort of a general interest story related to coronavirus and the corporate end times in which we now live. I'll read you The Verge story. Jay Peters is the writer. Medical company threatens to sue volunteers that 3D printed valves for life-saving coronavirus treatments. It's interesting. I think the headline and maybe on the other story is a little bit clearer. Nah, not exactly. But I guess maybe the ventilator machines that they're using to keep people in the worst medical distress alive through their COVID-19 crisis has apparently the ventilators and the machinery is apparently dependent on a part of the machine that I guess has been having some particular difficulty of late, a valve, which the manufacturer of the equipment, I guess, retails for $11,000. It's an expensive part. But in these days of 3D printing, well, there's an innovative way around this, and that is to make your own with a 3D printer. And apparently, the volunteer who came up with this solution has been able to produce them for about $1 worth of materials, not to mention his time, of course, versus the $11,000 that the company was charging, and who knows when they would be delivering the damn things. All right, here's the Verge piece. A medical device manufacturer has threatened to sue a group of volunteers in Italy that 3D printed a valve used for life-saving coronavirus treatments. The valve typically costs about $11,000 from the medical device manufacturer, but the volunteers were able to print replicas for about $1 a piece. And this report in The Verge relies on that other article from Tech Dirt that I told you about to make that claim. Anyway, a hospital in Italy was in need of the valves after running out while treating patients for COVID-19. And maybe I have it wrong. Maybe they're not part of the ventilators, but you get the idea. They are, you know what you're going to be helping people with if they're suffering from COVID-19. That's breathing. The hospital's usual supplier said they could not make the valves in time to treat the patients, according to Metro, the press outlet from the UK. That launched a search for a way to 3D print a replica part, and Christian Fracassi and Alessandro Ramaoli. How do you like that? Okay. Alessandro Ramaoli, I'm guessing at that. Not ravioli, Ramaoli. Ramaioli. Who work at an Italian startup called Isinova. ISINNOVA, offered their company's printer, the 3D printer, for the job, reports Business Insider. This is quite a conglomeration of sources here. Good job at The Verge. However, when the pair asked the manufacturer of the valves for blueprints that they could use to print replicas, the company declined and threatened to sue for patent infringement, which they can do, but maybe ought not to do. According to Business Insider Italia, the Italian version of Business Insider, Fracassi and Ramaoli moved ahead anyway, because they like saving lives, by measuring the valves and 3D printing 3 different versions of them. So far, the valves they have made have worked on 10 patients as of March 14th, according to Massimo Temporelli, the founder of Italian manufacturing solutions company Fab Lab, nice name, who helped recruit Fracassi and Ramioli to print the replica valves. They're not working from home? The patients were people in danger of life, which was really in danger of death, of course, but the Italians, such an optimistic people. I don't know, they constructed it this way. The patients were people in danger of life, and we acted, period, said Fracassi in a Facebook post. He also said, "We have no intention of profit on this situation, not at $1 a piece, certainly, and we are not going to use the designs or product beyond the strict need for us forced to act, and we are not going to spread the drawing." Well, maybe they could share it a little bit with hospitals around the world. We'll see how they deal with this. Here's a good look at the valves shared by, well, you won't be able to see them, but if you follow the source or later on click through, you'll be able to see it yourself. A good look at the valves shared by Italy's Minister of Technological Innovation, Paola Pisano, on Twitter. And yeah, I mean, here's a bunch of them. I guess that they printed up. She's commenting on them in Italian, which I can't read, but maybe we could figure it out. But, you know, from a little bit of Spanish knowledge, we could probably figure it out. Do you want to try and read it in Italian? I don't know. How's my Italian? Complimenti a Christian Fracassi. It actually sort of works. E tutte le persone che lo hanno... I can't read the rest of this. Anyway, it's, I guess, congratulations to him. Thanks very much to him for producing these things. Very interesting. For how do you like that in terms of tech? There's companies suing people, trying to keep them from giving any of the vaccines that they're trying to develop to China because they're afraid China will make them available for free. And companies suing people who are able to 3D print $11,000 parts for vital medical equipment for $1. Got to put a stop to that. Italy, of course, has more than 31,500 confirmed infections of COVID-19 and more than 2,500 confirmed deaths. Both figures trail only China. Is the Tech Dirt version of this any more informative? I'm just sort of taking, it's certainly denser, but I think their article is as brief. It's just in tiny font. Let's take a look at the original then. Glyn Moody, I guess, the writer for the Tech Dirt entry here. Volunteers 3D print unobtainable $11,000 valve for $1 to keep COVID-19 patients alive. Original manufacturer threatens to sue. Well, they lost out on a lot of money. Tech Dirt has just written about the extraordinary legal action taken against a company producing COVID-19 tests. Sadly, it's not the only example of some individuals putting profits before people. Here's a story from Italy, which is currently seeing more new coronavirus cases and deaths than anywhere else in the world. Last Thursday, a hospital in Brescia, is that how they would pronounce it? Brescia, Brescia, in the north of Italy, needed supplies of special valves in order to use breathing equipment. Okay, at least I have that part right. Breathing equipment to help keep COVID-19 patients alive in intensive care. It's linked to the original article, which is in Italian, which would be even harder to read. The manufacturer was unable to provide them because of the demand for this particular valve. The Metro site explains what happened next. With the help of the editor of a local newspaper, Giornale di Brescia, and, there's the newspaper, Journal of Brescia, and tech expert Massimo Temporelli, doctors launched a search for a 3D printer, a device, you know what that is. Word soon reached Fracassi, a pharmaceutical company boss in possession of the coveted machine. All we need to do is step up to an emergency war footing for production of 3D printers, and then we can make ventilators with them. How about that? It doesn't really work like that. He immediately brought his device to the hospital and in just a few hours redesigned and then produced the missing piece. Maybe it does work like that. I don't know. Actually, it wasn't quite as simple as that suggests. Aha. Business Insider Italia explains that even though the original manufacturer was unable to supply the part, it refused to share the relevant 3D file with Fracassi to help him print the valve. It even went so far as to threaten him for patent infringement if he tried to do so on his own. Since lives were at stake, he went ahead anyway, creating the 3D file from scratch. According to the Metro article, he produced an initial batch of 10 and then 100 more, all for free. It only cost him $1 per, and he was willing to put that out of pocket, I guess. Fracassi admits that his 3D printed versions might not be very durable or reusable, but when it's possible to make replacements so cheaply, each 3D printed part costs just €1, or roughly $1, that isn't a problem. At least it wouldn't be, except for the threat of legal action, which is why Fracassi doesn't dare share his 3D file with other hospitals, despite the desperate need for these valves. Maybe they ought to release him from that. All the courts are closed in Italy anyway, so they can't file suit against you. They can just threaten to do so later. But hey, if all the clerks die, I don't know. If you're wondering why the original manufacturer would risk what is bound to be awful publicity for its actions over something that only costs €1 to make, a detail in the Business Insider Italia article provides an explanation. The official list price for single valve is €10,000, about $11,000. This is a perfect example of how granting an intellectual monopoly in the form of a patent allows almost arbitrarily high prices to be charged, and quite legally. That would be bad enough in any situation, but when lives are at stake and Italian hospitals struggle to buy even basic equipment like face masks, demanding such a sum is even worse. And when a pandemic is raging out of control, for a company to threaten those selflessly trying to save lives in this way is completely beyond the pale. Well, that's largely true. That's the opinion, just like your opinion, man, of Glyn Moody, Glyn, Glyn. I don't know whether that's just Glenn, and I'm saying Glyn because there's a Y in there. Is this a Welsh person? I have no idea. Anyway, you can follow this person, I don't know, maybe on Twitter. Maybe I'll look on Twitter and see if I can find out more about, maybe there's a pronunciation guide. No. But okay. It's out there, and you can follow along the writer on Twitter and any number of other social media platforms as well. That, I thought, rather fascinating. Not the end of the line today for fascinating stuff. Let's see. I did put aside that Jeremy Young thread, but Greg took care of that one. Glenn was already still on my mind here. Gosh, there's an awful lot. Let's go where? First to the New York Times. An article that is generating an awful lot of discussion, to say the very least, about how poorly the Trump administration is doing in every aspect of what they should be doing right now. The article entitled, "Trump Slowly Enlisting More Agencies in Whole of Government Response to the Virus." And that sounds good all by itself, but doesn't entirely capture everything here. And I did see a couple of interesting responses to that, including, let me see, I'll look through my own tweet thread here so I can grab the response I'm thinking of. Dan Frumkin commenting on this. The article is good, and it's good that there's an attempt at a governmental response at this point. But he says, this is good, but requires daily updates. We're going to have to watch this. And the minute the White House started talking about a whole of government approach, reporters should have been checking to see if it was true. Again, I'll renew my prediction as it now turns out to be true. My prediction from the Friday the 13th press conference was that the biggest lie told by Trump there would eventually turn out to be the one in which he said that the federal government had ordered a large number of ventilators. As it turns out, that's probably not. That I was probably right, and that was probably not true. There's just no evidence that order, whatever that might mean, has actually been placed anywhere. And I think I might have grabbed that story and set it aside, but maybe it's just a tweet I saw along the way. Essentially, something for reporters to look into, and they've been able to find no confirmation from any manufacturers of ventilators anywhere of any large-scale order for procuring a large number or any number of ventilators at all by the federal government. So I guess that's that'll help you focus on how we're doing and provide a press reporting angle on it as well. Oh, by the way, before I launch into the Times piece, one follow-up to my wondering yesterday after seeing a map of where the coronavirus had shown up in the various different countries around the world. There was a noticeable blank spot in much of Africa, and I was pondering whether that might mean either that the disease hadn't spread there because there just wasn't that much international travel to and from some of these poorer countries, or perhaps that they didn't have the resources to do any testing or at least extensive testing and find and identify and confirm these cases. All of which, I guess, really, in hindsight, now that I see this article, revealed a certain bias about Africa. No surprise, I guess, for white American person like me to have that, but you should hold it in check, I guess, is what I should have been doing with it. But I've got a piece from The Intercept here that suggests a different explanation. Whether it captures everything or not, we'll decide. African nations turn the tables, imposing travel restrictions against the U.S. and Europe and China to stave off the coronavirus, which I guess would be wise and warranted, given what the United States and others have been doing. But it also hints at the possibility that having dealt with the very serious outbreaks of Ebola virus and other deadlier viruses in the past, these admittedly poorer countries actually do have a fairly significant infrastructure for dealing with pandemic virus. And they might have been, it's not that they've developed any sort of immunity to it necessarily, although that would be fantastic to find out if that was the case, but rather that they know what to do, and having lockdowns in response to virus is not novel for them. So they've been there, done that in a certain sense, and that's a slightly more positive spin on these things. I've just been handed a note. This is actually true that I've just been handed a note. But get this, I already knew the contents of the note. I had set it aside earlier in the show when I saw the tweet of Evan McMullen, tweeted at 9:12 in the morning, and I didn't get to sneak it into our discussions with Greg. There appears to have been a significant earthquake in Salt Lake City, he says. The note I just got puts it at a 5.7 on, as everyone knows, the Richter scale. It's a fairly significant earthquake. The reason it came to me by note is that, of course, my wife here is also working from home these days, and they have a major supply and fulfillment center for their direct-to-consumer products that's based in the Salt Lake City area. So now they have that to add to their woes. So we'll check that out for you, or at least you can check it out certainly on your own if you need to. So I understand, by the way, that the rest of the world is now feeling the KITM World Headquarters pain when it's a snow day or everybody's working from home. Everybody else is now dealing with either doing their podcasts or their interviews if they're working from home as reporters, and the kids and the rest of the family are making noise and conducting their own business in the background, just something we'll all get used to. in the near future. So it's not just us here at Kagro in the Morning anymore. Now it's the rest of you, and now it's fashionable to have that going on in the background. Aha. So, over to the New York Times, where Eric Lipton, Zolan Kano-Youngs, and Helene Cooper have put together this interesting report about to which everyone is reacting. Trump slowly enlisting more agencies, and it is slow. In whole of government response to virus. Hospital ships stayed in port. Veterans hospitals awaited orders, and requests for help went unanswered as much of the government remained on the sidelines. What we're talking about here is essentially one of the side effects that we probably would have seen earlier, but for so many other things going on, but now a crisis definitely illustrates it. The idea of bringing an outsider to Washington, D.C. to shake things up. One of the innate problems with outsiders, I mean, it's great in theory in some ways, to take a new approach to things and to shake things up. That's why they say it. It sounds like a positive development. It sounds like something that people would say, yeah, we should be doing that. It makes a great deal of sense. Well, one of the problems with bringing an outsider is they just inherently, this is just what it means to be an outsider, they don't know how government works. And sometimes, like I said, there's some advantage to that or some selling point to that. But making the government respond to your novel ideas still requires knowing how government works and knowing which buttons to press and levers to pull. And outsiders, by definition, don't know that. Now, a smart outsider can educate themselves quickly and learn how government works or surround themselves with people who do know. And I'm the outsider and I'm giving the orders to the people who are or were insiders from previous administrations and do know how things work. So there can be a novel approach to making things work. But if you're a stupid person and you delight in remaining stupid and your base loves it when you're stupid, then you're really not going to be able to do anything. And yeah, the government's going to remain on the sidelines during perhaps the greatest crisis maybe the greatest crisis it's ever faced. I mean, hard to compare it to World War II, etc. But the country knew what to do in World War II. I mean, and the person at the head of the government had some idea how that was going to work. And here we're flying blind. All right, here's the story. The mayor of Seattle wanted mass tents from the federal government. Why? To rapidly build shelters to house people in quarantine. By the way, lots of suggestions out there for the casinos or other large hotels now going unused. Perhaps they would do that, right? We mentioned that yesterday with Joan. All right. So the state of New York, at the same time, is pleading for help from the Army Corps of Engineers to quickly build hospitals. Oregon's governor repeatedly pressed the Department of Health and Human Services for hundreds of thousands of respirators, gowns and gloves, face shields, or goggles. After so many pleas, President Trump moved, finally, on Tuesday to begin enlisting much of his government, he loves to say that, I'm sure, his government, in what the White House had called for weeks a whole-of-government approach to the rampaging coronavirus. They, of course, mean W-H-O-L-E, whole of government. Donald Trump brings a unique spin to that. And if you're looking for help, don't look to the whole of government. The whole where our federal government used to be is going to be of no help to you. We are starting the process, Mr. Trump said during a news conference Tuesday afternoon, referring to New York's request to enlist the Army Corps of Engineers. The state is working on it very hard themselves, but will probably supplement what they're doing. By the way, I don't know if there's any plans for more press conferences today. I think he's learned that he can't fix the stock market this way, but he might still feel compelled to look like he's in charge. I haven't been watching lately. Is Mike Pence also speaking at these things? I know that was the practice for the first couple of them, and I haven't heard anybody talking about his comments at these things, and I don't know whether it's just they're unremarkable or unremarkable by comparison to Trump's, or he's not speaking at the events at all, And I wonder, because I always thought he had fallen ill with coronavirus before Trump did. Trump's voice still sounds thin, and I don't know whether that's going to be a continuing thread. All right. We're going to have to jump away for another break, but I will continue with this article because it did have, or I guess I could tell you the highlights of the article even before we go to break, was that people were tweeting this thing around that apparently the big pull quote people were grabbing from this article was that apparently the DOD had some stockpiles perhaps of masks and gowns and such that they were going to release, and maybe even ventilators as well, released to the control of the Department of Health and Human Services. And I guess they were going to pass that aid on any time now. But of course, Trump just wanted them to do us a favor first. I'm sure he can wheedle something out of this, right? Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. And I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday. But our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to Patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Networks Radio. It's quite a time out there. I had a little discussion about the earthquake in Salt Lake City during the break. I know that just from past experience, my wife's in the operations department, essentially, of our company. And so I've heard over the years about, let's see, after like Y2K stuff and then pandemic flu concerns and all sort of terrorist attacks, 9/11, etc. That so I've heard a little bit along the way about, we really need to distribute our ability to fulfill orders, etc., to various places around the country as a contingency plan. What if this happens or that happens? And I'm just sort of imagining now. We now have to have contingency plans for 2 or more of the contingency plans to be in effect at the same time, right? They have some thoughts about, well, if there's, pandemic illness, well, then it may or may not be affecting the entirety of the country all at once. But so now they have to have their natural disaster plan in effect, plus their pandemic illness plan in effect. And it's just like, what a 1-2 punch that is. Luckily, Mitt Romney says he's going to send everybody $1,000. He was one of the first Republicans out with the plan to supplement income, and I guess they're probably glad of that in Utah. Anyway, we'll see what happens. Wish the best to everybody in the Salt Lake City area and see what we find out in the coming hours. All right, back to the New York Times whole of government report, as they said. Where did we leave off? Right, Trump saying we're starting the process, referring to New York's request to enlist the Army Corps of Engineers. The state is working on it very hard themselves, but will probably supplement what they're doing. And then I think he went on to tweet his criticism and say that Governor Cuomo needs to do more, and all other Democrats who are requesting help are also losers. The shift came 4 days after an internal report from the Department of Health and Human Services, not yet shared with the public, concluded that the pandemic will last 18 months or longer and could include multiple waves of illness that Greg had alluded to earlier. I guess also we can share the fact that I had seen tweeted around here. I have the tweet of Eric Topol, a physician, scientist, author, and editor as he identifies himself in his blue check-marked Twitter profile. Don't know whether he's also the inventor of the smoker's tooth polish or not, but I doubt it. Anyway, the second wave of COVID-19, he's talking about Singapore, Taiwan, and Hong Kong were leading mitigation, but now showing many new cases, emphasizing the long haul ahead, no less potential of what can happen when measures are relaxed. And it is reported here in the Wall Street Journal, which ordinarily is behind a paywall, and we'll see whether they lifted their paywall on that one because of the coronavirus, as so many others have done, and the answer is no. However, you can get 50% off your subscription if you want to pay for news about the coronavirus around the world. He did, however, include a screenshot of the Wall Street Journal's print, I guess, maybe a screenshot of of his own reading of the piece because he's got a subscription. So there is that, and I'll include his tweet, and you can read their reporting on that angle. But yeah, so we're not over with, and second wave is something we're going to be talking about in the coming days as well. All right. So not only the British government, but our own government coming quickly to the conclusion that this could be an 18-month situation, depending on what we do. And it doesn't necessarily mean we're all indoors for 18 months, but we're going to be dealing with it for quite some time. The virus, the agency assumed, that's our own HHS, will likely cause significant shortages for government, private sector, and individual U.S. consumers, and coordination by the federal government would be imperative, according to the document. However, we're enjoying a throwback to the Articles of Confederation these days, as the head of our federal government says, do it in the States. You try it yourself, and we'll see whether we can help you. Even after... I've skipped this part. Yet, despite promises of a whole-of-government effort, key agencies like the Army Corps of Engineers, other parts of the Defense Department, the FEMA, and Department of Veterans Affairs had not been asked to play much of a role. Even after Mr. Trump committed to supporting the states on Tuesday, do it yourselves, right? The Army Corps of Engineers said it still had not received direction from the administration. Just like everything else. So Trump orders something, his lackeys say, oh, well, it's done, Mr. President, no problem. And then nothing happens, which was the case with, we're going to, close down travel from overseas, and we're just going to screen incoming passengers in the airports. And there was no plan for anything. Lots of passengers reporting on Twitter. Yeah, I came in from Europe. There's no screening. They didn't ask me anything. I walked in, but then I had to stand around for hours trying to get through. Screening just not happening, and it's just making people stand around in large groups in an airport and making them sicker, more likely, than anything else. All right. So no direction from the administration. No surprise there. We need the federal government to play its role. Governor Andrew Cuomo of New York said on Monday, the federal government has tremendous capacity. Much of that capacity is untapped. Hospital ships, we have those. They're at port. Doing nothing. I mean, they could be in port doing something, but they should maybe sail to a place where they might be of use. The Department of Veterans Affairs, legally designated as the backup healthcare system in national emergencies, awaits requests for help, which is weird because we're in an emergency. The Veterans Department has a surplus of beds in many of its 172 hospital centers and a robust number of special rooms for patients with breathing disorders. The sprawling system of emergency doctors and nurses ready to be deployed by the Department of Health and Human Services, known as the National Disaster Medical System, is also still waiting for orders, other than to staff locations where passengers offloaded from cruise ships are being quarantined. That they got done, but nothing else. The president is not a government person. He doesn't know that these resources are out there, and he doesn't have anyone around him who knows either. That's the problem. The Defense Department, home to 1.3 million active duty troops and a civilian and military infrastructure that has made planning for national emergencies almost an art form, has yet to be deployed to its fullest capabilities. They're all moving into Space Force, I guess. Senior Pentagon officials say they are ready to assist in any way that is ordered, but they also caution that much of the military's emergency medical care is designed for combat trauma or natural disasters and not mass quarantine for infections. Good point. The last time a big infectious disease epidemic emerged, President Barack Obama, remember him, dispatched nearly 3,000 American troops to Liberia to build hospitals and treatment centers to help fight Ebola. The Pentagon opened a joint command operation at a hotel in Liberia's capital, Monrovia, to coordinate the international effort to combat the disease, and the American military provided engineers to help construct additional treatment facilities and sent people to train healthcare workers in West Africa to deal with the crisis. That's how you use government. The Pentagon has been running through plans for how the American military can help, from deploying the Navy hospital ships Comfort and Mercy to the Hudson River in New York or off the West Coast, to building tent cities near urban hospitals to triage cases. Defense Secretary Mark Esper said on Tuesday that the Pentagon will make available to the Department of Health and Human Services up to 5 million N95 masks, which can be used to help protect health workers and vulnerable people against the virus. The first 1 million, he said, would be available immediately. The Pentagon is also making available 2,000 ventilators for hospitals, a number that would likely fall far short yes, of the expected need, but still would like to have it. When you look at how many people may need it, 2,000 doesn't put much of a dent into it, Mr. Esper said. While the military has infrastructure to help, there are limits. Field hospitals and the hospital ships Comfort and Mercy are designed for trauma wounds, not viruses, and doctors would have to be assigned from elsewhere to staff them. The ships, each with a 1,000-bed capacity, have helped in natural disasters like tsunamis, hurricanes, and earthquakes, not quarantines. Defense Department officials said that one possibility for the Comfort would be to station in New York Harbor and absorb non-coronavirus patients in New York, which would help free up hospital beds in Manhattan to attend to infectious cases. Sounds like a decent plan. Governor Jay Inslee of Washington said he spoke with Mr. Esper on Tuesday about getting access to resources that could help bolster new medical hospitals. I would predict that we're going to be getting real help from the Department of Defense, Mr. Inslee said. I would predict that too if it wasn't for the fact that Donald Trump was president. Part of the challenge is the unusual role Mr. Trump has assigned to FEMA, which traditionally is designated as the lead federal agency during major disasters to take requests from individual states and then assign other federal players to deliver the pleas for help. In this case, Mr. Trump has left the Department of Health and Human Services in charge. FEMA is the only agency that has the full breadth of the federal government at its disposal, said Daniel J. Kanuski, I'm going to guess at that pronunciation, who in January left FEMA after serving since the start of the Trump administration as one of the agency's top officials. The disaster is so far-reaching, the federal government would never be able to address all the requests for help, said W. Craig Fugate, F-U-G-A-T-E. I don't know how that's actually pronounced. Fugati? I doubt that. But anyway, he led FEMA, so you should know that, during the Obama administration, except I didn't pay attention because I figured everything was under control. And it was. Most disaster supplies are set up for localized disaster response, he said, not something that is occurring across the nation all at the same time. True and a good point. Oregon sent a letter to Vice President Mike Pence, because they thought he might be in charge of something, on March 3rd asking for 400,000 N5 masks. For days, it got no response, and only by March 14th received its first shipment. Oddly, 11 days after the first request, which of course is about how far we're running behind Italy these days. And what did they get? They asked for 400,000 masks. 11 days later, they got 36,800. But there was a problem on top of that. Most of the equipment they got was well past the expiration date. I didn't even know they had those. And wouldn't be suitable for surgical settings, the state said. Dang. New York City also put in a request for more than 2 million masks and received 76,000. I'm surprised nobody got 45, right? All were expired, said Dean Criswell, New York City's emergency management commissioner. The city is also requesting additional beds for intensive care units and medical teams to staff a convention center that may be turned into a temporary medical facility. I didn't realize N5 masks could expire. I'm sure the ones that I happen to have from way back when, I didn't hoard them this time. I didn't buy any masks this time, in case you're wondering. But I had a couple of them around, and I assume that means they're expired, and I don't know whether that means they're useless, but I certainly won't be going into surgery with any of them. It's been extremely inadequate, Governor Kate Brown of Oregon told reporters late last week of the response from the federal government, which offered to send the state only a fraction of the medical supplies she had requested. We've been contacting this administration every single day since then, and we've received nothing. Zip, zero, nothing from them. And so she got attacked on TV too. Mr. Cuomo expressed appreciation for the rapidly growing capacity to conduct coronavirus tests, which has been the delay that so far has drawn the most attention. But the real need now is for a much broader response, he said. He wants the Army Corps of Engineers to help New York set up temporary hospitals. As he said, he fears the state is about to face a disastrous shortage of hospital beds, particularly in intensive care units. They build airports, he said. They build the bridges. They build hospitals. This is exactly what they do. A spokeswoman for the Army Corps of Engineers said on Tuesday that the agency, which has had its massive capacity put to use in past disasters like Hurricane Katrina, was still awaiting orders. I didn't know I was supposed to tell them anything. I'm going to do the military so good your head will spin, right? The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is prepared to assist the nation in a time of crisis to the very best of its capabilities, and we are postured to lean forward when an official request is received through the Defense Department. Rainey W. Brunson, an Army Corps spokeswoman, said in a statement, however, at this time, we have not been assigned a mission. Mr. Trump on Tuesday said he had recently spoken with Mr. Cuomo and that discussions had begun with Defense Department officials about possibly building pop-up hospitals with sites even under consideration. He also suggested that FEMA will soon be playing a more aggressive role. It would be nice if they were around. I don't know where he would have gotten the time to issue orders to the Army Corps of Engineers. He was busy playing golf at Mar-a-Lago the weekend before last, so there really was nothing to be done about this. We are closely working and getting FEMA involved, Mr. Trump said. They have been involved, but we are getting them involved to a different level. Aha, right? So mid-sentence, he figures out, we're working closely and getting FEMA involved. And a little voice in his head, which sounds a lot like this voice, said, shouldn't they already have been involved? I mean, it's federal emergency management. What I mean is they've been involved, but we're getting them involved to a different level, like a level that exists. But other agencies remain quiet. Veterans groups say the Department of Veterans Affairs has not appeared front and center of any of the emergency response communication efforts. I mean, what about veterans who get this? Maybe they could just help with them, but no. The nation has not embraced the scope of the VA, said Randy Reese, the executive director of the Washington headquarters of Disabled American Veterans. They need to send the message that we are prepared, and right now we have not seen or heard that, and it brings some sense of concern. FEMA officials said the Department of Health and Human Services remains in charge of the federal response, and it too is waiting for orders from the agency before it moves to ramp up assistance. FEMA will continue supporting all states and territories during this dynamic situation. Lizzie Litzow, that's real. Lizzie Litzow, a FEMA spokeswoman, said, the Department of Health and Human Services did not respond to requests for comment. They're too busy, you see. In previous national emergencies, FEMA would be responsible for finding out where to obtain masks, ventilators, hospital beds, and tents from either the military or the private sector, and ensuring the supplies are delivered to states, according to Michael Chertoff, remember him? Secretary of Homeland Security under President George W. Bush, who oversaw the response to Hurricane Katrina and sucked. They have relationships and know where to look for things, Mr. Chertoff said. Without that, it's not clear to me who would be doing the coordination and the facilitation function. And that's the difference between knowing how government works, because you're one of those dirty, filthy, disgusting insiders, or knowing jack squat about how government works because you're one of those awesome businessmen outsiders who know how to get things done. All right. Well, there's more problems inside the federal government than just that. There are several others, as a matter of fact. And I just remembered the other article I wanted to share with you, but that's not a good segue now, so I'll forget it between now and tomorrow, and then we'll rediscover it all over again. Here's a problem that I didn't... Well, I can't say I didn't anticipate it, but let's see what we can fit all this in. Shall we go with Politico or the Washington Post? So let's go with the Washington Post one, because why not? It's closer. Federal personnel chief quits abruptly amid coronavirus planning for the workforce of 2.1 million. How do you like that? That's was the Politico headline better? That doesn't really I know what the story is. Maybe you've read the story too. OPM Chief Dale Cabanis, I don't know how it's pronounced. Caban, like cabana, but no A at the end. Cabanis, Cabanis, abruptly resigns. Why is that a problem? Well, actually, okay, we'll go to the Washington Post for that story. Lisa Rain is the reporter here. The federal personnel director quit with no notice Tuesday after only 5 months on the job, leaving the agency that oversees workplace policy for 2.1 million civil servants with no leader amid the government's response to the coronavirus pandemic. Why, oh why, would Dale Cabanis do this? The answer is, I don't know. Office of Personnel Management Chief Dale Cabanis resigned in frustration following months of tension with the White House Budget Office and more recently with its newly configured staffing office and a political appointee the office installed at OPM in the last month, according to 3 people familiar with her decision. Cabanis, thought that she was being micromanaged and that her authority was not respected. The people said, respect my authority. That she should have tried that. That might have worked. An agency spokesperson said in a statement that Cabanis's deputy, Michael Regas, would take over the agency on an acting basis. That's right. There's our acting. Exactly. That's the basis we're talking about. As the administration prepared to confront the threat of the novel coronavirus posed to federal workers and everybody else that the federal workers are supposed to help, Cabanis found herself and her agency sidelined by the White House Budget Office. As human resources manager for the federal workforce, that's apparently the job here, Cabanis was unable to communicate clear, timely messages to agency managers on how they should respond to the growing public health threat, said the people familiar with her decision, who spoke on condition of anonymity because they were not authorized to publicly discuss her resignation. Guidance to managers on when they should send their staffs home to telework was often vague and came weeks after U.S. health officials urged Americans to work from home and minimize contact with others. Even now, managers say privately they have not received clear instructions from the Trump administration on how to manage their workforce during the crisis. Cabanis, maybe, 58, has deep experience with federal personnel issues and was respected by her staff and by Republicans and Democrats on Capitol Hill, where she served for 2 decades as a top Senate aide overseeing civil service issues. Since her Senate confirmation in October, she was viewed as restoring morale to the agency, that's out the window now, after a tumultuous 2 years of shifting missions and leadership. OPM's government-wide mission is to administer federal health insurance policies. I wonder if they're important. Retirement claims, benefits, and workforce policy. President Trump fired his first Senate-confirmed personnel director, Jeff Tienhan Pan, in October 2018 after 7 months because he resisted the administration's plan to dismantle the agency and farm out its functions to other departments, including the White House. Pan was replaced by Margaret Weichert, a senior official in the White House Office of Management and Budget, who pushed the plan for 18 months as a way to shrink a troubled agency whose mission was disjointed. But the idea had little traction in Congress, even among Republicans, and in December the president abandoned the effort, because that's what he does. Weichert had continued to push the breakup when she returned to the budget office. She and Cabanas clashed over multiple issues, with Cabanas feeling that her authority was diminished. Weichert resigned from the administration this month, but has stayed on during the coronavirus crisis. It's not clear for how long. In recent weeks, the White House installed a new liaison at OPM, an attorney who does not have experience with federal personnel issues, but tried to exert authority over Cabanas. According to the people familiar with the situation, the White House Personnel Office, which has been in transition in recent months under the leadership of 29-year-old, you remember, John McEntee, a Trump confidant, also exerted a level of influence on staffing decisions that she found untenable, the people said. I think the Politico article is a little more closely focused on that guy. Maybe we can skim a little bit of that article and see if we can get their flavor to OPM Chief Dale Cabanas, I'm sorry if I'm not getting the name right, abruptly resigns. Daniel Lipman writes at Politico. Let's see. Cabanas stepped down because of what two people familiar with the matter said was poor treatment from the 29-year-old head of the Presidential Personnel Office, John McEntee, and a powerful appointee at OPM, Paul Dans, the new White House liaison and senior advisor to the director of OPM. OPM Deputy Director Michael Regas is now the acting director of OPM, according to the spokesperson there. The departure casts a cloud of uncertainty over the federal workforce as it struggles to decide how to handle the coronavirus outbreak, with growing questions about the Trump administration's decision to keep most government offices open and how it is handling remote work. I guess it's mostly overlapping information from here on about that. Although there is some additional detail of some interest, but perhaps I can divert from here over to hinting at an article I would like to read a little more closely, perhaps tomorrow. But an interesting entry the other day from Norm Ornstein, writing at The Atlantic, speaking of the number of people from the government who are working from home or on some ad hoc basis here. This good point made back on the 13th. Congress desperately needs a contingency plan. Not so much, it's true about like what the hell they're going to do, period, but how to continue voting on getting stuff done when a large gathering like a voting session would be inadvisable, particularly for so many elderly members of Congress. But he asks this question: what will happen, though, if lawmakers can no longer meet because of the coronavirus? It's more than just not being able to vote on things and get things done, which a lot of people roll their eyes at anyway. But some other questions. What happens if the pandemic reaches a point that requires all travel and mass gatherings to be suspended and members of Congress can't meet in the U.S. Capitol or anywhere else? What happens if enough members of Congress catch the virus or are quarantined that there's no longer a quorum to meet and conduct business? How, in such a circumstance, would Congress pass laws to address containment, treatment, and appropriations, or exercise oversight of an administration that cannot be trusted, even under quote-unquote normal circumstances without the virus, cannot be trusted to act appropriately? That's a pretty serious question. Ordinarily, you're able to at least say, well, I think we can depend on the ability of the administration to recognize what the proper role of an actual American administration is here, and not to say steal all the money. Remember, Stephen Mnuchin he says he's all ready to, as he puts it, inject $1 trillion into the economy to try and bolster things in the middle of this crisis. Is Stephen Mnuchin going to be handing out checks from the Treasury totally unsupervised? Are we going to be able to hold oversight hearings? I mean, I don't think they really fear oversight hearings anyway, because they ignore subpoenas anyhow. The impeachment situation leaves us without any serious method by which anyone could hold this administration to account. I don't know whether the coronavirus crisis shakes up the Republicans enough that they might actually change their minds about the wisdom of removing Donald Trump from office. Not so far, I don't think. But then on the other hand, it's turned Tom Cotton and Josh Hawley into universal basic income advocates. So who knows? I don't know. And we may end up finding the Democratic Party outflanked by free-spending Republicans who want to send people $1,000, $2,000, who knows how many $1,000 a month as universal basic income. I guess anything's possible. But do you trust Steven Mnuchin to be the guy signing the checks? I mean, I've always thought that he's been a joke that he's secretly removing all the gold from Fort Knox. Maybe now he really is. Maybe that's what he means by injecting $1 trillion into the economy. He means into his own pocket. How are we going to know what they're doing and whether it's worth doing, whether it's effective, or whether they're even doing it legally? I have no idea. And Donald Trump is not the person you want to put the prospect past of stealing and looting everything the government has to offer. I still think he's hoarding all the masks and hand sanitizer at his golf courses, and Eric was going to sell it on eBay.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
All right, what's going on? Well, it's time to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Book and Speakeasy. He'll be catching up on a number of other stories, including this very interesting and timely one. Joe Biden is finally getting Secret Service protection after repeatedly being accosted by protesters. Probably a good idea. Much more he's got on tap for you. Stay tuned. We'll see you tomorrow.